I love racing. You probably love racing too if you're watching this. But the best series is definitely not Formula 1, definitely not the 24 Hours of Le Mans, not even the Indy 500. No. The best racing series, I would argue, in the world, in terms of actual wheel-to-wheel battles, is done with Miatas. Specifically, the MX5 Cup. When the NA Miata was launched in 1989, it heralded in the rebirth of the classic British roadster formula, and it was a sensation with just a 2,100 pound curb weight and one of the best manual gearboxes ever put in a car. And since it was so light, other things could be smaller without compromise. Power was just 115, going to 185mm tires, and neither of those figures lessened the experience because it was so light and so well set up to drive. And the small size and, shall we say, minimalistic amenities on the interior meant that the MX5 was cheap too, just 14 grand new, which meant they sold over 430,000 of them in just its first generation. And with it being so affordable and so driver-focused, people took it racing. Like a lot of people. And immediately they were entered into the Sports Car Club of America's showroom stock C-Class. Now SSC basically means a production car with just safety features like a roll cage, racing tires, and a kill switch. That meant, again, it was affordable on top of the already affordable car. In fact, so many Mazdas were entered that the SCCA decided to make a whole Miata class befittingly called Spec-Miata. It's a little confusing, but Spec-Miata races for both SCCA and NASA. No, the other ones, thank you. And with its own series, the Spec cars have a lot more common racing parts, like Penske shocks and standardized racing slicks. But critically, the engines are completely off limits. You can't do anything to the existing engine apart from the standardized Roush cylinder heads. And given the evolution of the MX5, there are lots of different classes for the 1.6-liter, 1.8-liter, and 2-liter engines. Currently, Spec-Miatas can go for as cheap as $8,000, which makes it excellent for beginner racers. And speaking of beginnings, the first Spec-Miata race was held on July 24th, 1999 at Texas World Speedway. Strangely, the first championships, as far as I can find on the interwebs, for a large MX5 racing season, weren't awarded until 2003, when it was branded as the Mazda Speed Miata Cup. And if you stick with the SCCA, the first champions wouldn't be crowned until 2006, but that proved to be a big year. Not just because MX5 Cups spread around the globe, but because they had the new 3rd-gen Miatas, which meant a new Cup car. Like previously, they had the standard issue 2-liter Mazda Speed Inline 4, making 170 horsepower. But now, they were sold directly through Mazda Speed's racing program. Now, Spec-Miata is still going strong today, not just with the newer cars, but the older generations are still racing. In fact, Mazda will continue to sell Spec-Miata conversion kits for your 3rd gen all the way until at least 2023. And they estimate that over 3,000 MX5s have been converted. But we're not going to talk about the true amateurs anymore. It's great racing, it's very accessible, and it's very fun. But let's talk about the big one. Relative speaking, of course. The Global MX5 Cup. Coinciding with the launch of the 2015 ND MX5, the Global MX5 Cup is the most professional Miata racing series. Over here in the States anyway, it serves as the IndyCar Support Series until 2021, when it was moved over to an IMSA Support Series. And with it being IMSA, you'd think that it would be a complete custom-built car, sort of like the GTLM cars, but no. The journey between an ND MX5 and the MX5 Cup car is not as complicated compared to that of other IMSA classes. Mazda does completely disassemble a factory spec MX5 for sure, and replace 250 components with racing parts to make the car more durable, but at the end of the day, it's still an MX5. Now, the engine is off limits like all other spec Miata classes, but it is built by Mazda Speed before it's sealed, so it gets a cold air intake and a higher redline to make nearly 200 horsepower, at 7,500 RPM, but it still follows the original NA philosophy, with a light curb weight, skinny 215 size tires, and a 6-speed sequential gearbox. All for just 59 grand out of the box, plus an average of 20,000-ish for preliminary team management stuff. So, you're in less than $100,000 to start your racing team. It's easily the most affordable pro racing series in the world, which is why Mazda sold a record 150 MX5 Cup cars between 2020 and 2021. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but look at it this way. In the 20 plus years of the 911 GT3 spec, only around 950 have actually been built in its entire life, and Mazda's already an eighth of the way there in just 2 years. But the big genius, in my mind, of Global MX5 Cup is how the race weekends are run. There's 2 races in a weekend, both about 45 minutes long. That puts it more in line with rallycross than an endurance race, because there's no fuel strategy, no fuel conservation, no pit problems, just maximum attack the whole time. And you have an incentive to be at maximum attack because the point structure encourages it, not just by awarding points to the top 10 finishers, but also to pole position, fastest lap, and most laps led, just to give you that extra push to try and get to the front. And since the MX-5s are not made of uber brittle carbon fiber that shatters if you look at it wrong, the racing is old school BTC levels of intense. Paint is swapped, bumpers are used, and drivers are pushed to their limits. Sure, they aren't as fast as other racing series, but look at it this way. You have to be perfect every single corner, arguably more so than a standard GT car or anything like that, because if you make a mistake, it can cost you 10 positions. The pack is so close together that if you make a mistake, you will fall halfway down the order, even if it's just running wide. And the skills are tested even more when it rains, because unless they start in the rain, those MX-5s do not swap for wet tires. Pit stops aren't really a thing, as I mentioned, and given the low power figure, taking the time to swap the tires usually isn't worth it. So you really have to balance the hydroplaning around the corners. It's a bit of a madhouse when it rains. There's a lot of mistakes, but again, since they're not carbon fiber brittle things made out of paper mache, if they bounce off the tire barrier, they can just put it in drive and keep going. And another more surprising aspect that the drivers have to be good at least on a few tracks, is bump drafting, since MX-5s raced at the Daytona 24-hour course for the last few years, and the convertible body style creates a huge hole in the air, and cars routinely come from 5th, heading up to the line, duck out of the slipstream with a massive speed advantage like it's NASCAR, and win by a nose on the line. Which brings me to another aspect of MX5 Cup racing. The finishes can be true nail-biters. Now, Le Mans winning margins are usually measured by laps. F1 is usually measured by seconds. MX5 Cup, usually by tenths of a second. In 2021, not a single race was finished with a gap between first or second that was greater than 2 seconds, with several going down to the thousandths of a second photo finish. And the prizes are phenomenal relative to the cost of entry. On top of several 6-figure scholarships, there's over $500,000 of prize money awarded at the end of the series, including $250K for the winner, $85K for second, $50K for third, and a Rookie of the Year prize of $80,000. Which means, technically, if you win on your rookie year, you could take home $330,000 for racing a Miata. Now, obviously, the prize pools are different in different countries and different Cup series, but that is some serious cash over here in the States. And, on top of that, the MX5 Cup series can serve as a spotting pool for future talent. That's why it's part of the IMSA sub-series. Is some actual GT teams and can look at him and say, I like that driver, we'll give him a shot next year. Since if you can succeed in a field of identical cars, you'll be much better in a series with different manufacturers. Racing in one big racing series can be incredibly difficult just because the cars are so similar. It basically takes the engineering advantage out of the equation. And in a world of ever-increasing engineering-based racing series, the MX5 Cup might just be the most honest, most exciting racing series on the planet.